Epsilasi, welcome to another edition of Mawio'mi. I'm your host, Jim Richardson.
I'm your co-host, Terry Richardson. Well, bro, we got some great guests with us today.
We sure do. You know, you look at what's happening now in the country with Bill 5, the ramifications of that. You know, there's been a lot of publicity with respect to First Nations sign into that, but it's all tied in with where we are historically. And we've got a great group here to talk about treaties, to talk about UNDRIP, talk about consultation, talk about reconciliation.
And talk about the challenges that we face in our communities.
Yeah. We have Chief Chris George. Chief,
hello.
Congratulations on your new election. We look forward to working with you for sure. And we have the old stalwart here.
How you doing, gentlemen?
Dean Vicaire. Dean's been with us before. And Dean, we had a great conversation then.
Great, thank you for having us.
And it's great having you guys here. And like my brother said, Chris, congratulations on your election. We all know that that's not always the easiest part. Now the hard work begins, obviously, as they say,
Absolutely.
right? So I guess from our perspective, where we would like to get started is talk a little bit about the challenges we're seeing in the province. You know, not only the province, but on the federal side as well. You know, we know that our neighbors to the south is not so neighborly anymore. Causing us some upheaval, and some of our issues now as First Nations are coming to the forefront. Specifically, Bill C5, which the building nation bill that the Prime Minister Carney has put forward, and we've seen that there was a meeting with nationally with all the chiefs, and there were some very big concerns raised. But I think the overall, I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but I think the overall thing is they realize we have to continue to move forward. But we have to do it in a very cautious way. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Absolutely. You know, there's no other way but forward. I think for me, a lot of my strategy for leadership and my vision for my administration, I come from an academic background. I come from a research background, so I'm always trying to trace back the history. Yeah. A lot of my research focused on the 1725 treaty. 300-year anniversary of this. But I really wanted to look at the context in which that happened. You know, sometimes you read history, this happened, that happened, it's a very linear process. But 1725, those treaties didn't happen in a vacuum. It was our first relationship with England. What led to that? So tracing that back to the United States colonies, what would become the US colonies.
1600s, in fact, yeah.
King Philip's War. Then you have Upper and Lower Canada and Wabanaki peoples, our peoples. We're trapped in the middle of this, and I think they recognized the reality of the situation that they were facing. And I think by entering those treaties in 1725, like their ancestors with wampum treaties 200 years before 1725, was the same thing. We hear it all the time, peace and friendship, peace and friendship. So I think one of the challenges for me, we live in this reality. There's no doubt that we have to deal with crown title and some of these concepts that, from a Mi'kmaq lens, I disagree. So what were our ancestors agreeing to in 1725? What was in their mindset when they signed treaty with an empire, an English empire that they fought, and they knew who they were and they knew how they operated? So what caused them? What was their intention at that time? What was their intention for us 300 years later? So I think the challenge that I'm facing is that when we talk about our treaties, when we talk about it, we have to deal with a European perspective, a British, North American perspective on the peace and friendship treaties. When you really look at the history of what was said and negotiated between them, when you look at the actual historical narratives, the Mi'kmaq perspective is often left out, like in most Indigenous stories. So that's the key thing, is what were our ancestors thinking at that time, and how can we reclaim those kind of visions today?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, in terms of what were they thinking at that time and understanding, that's where oral history comes in, and why the Supreme Court recognizes oral history, because the interpretation, you have to remember that the language issue was there at that time. They didn't understand one another. And people have to understand, what is the definition of a treaty? It's an international binding legal document. And in many cases, it hasn't been upheld. You know, you look at northern Manitoba, for example, where you had, you go up there, as long as the grass grows, the river flows, everything's fine. Oh, by the way, we had the flood, the Churchill rivers and so on, and impacted your hunting and fishing and your traditional way of life, but that was progress. But that's not what the treaty said it was supposed to be. The treaty said you were supposed to live there in peace and harmony, you know. And I think that there's a lot of issues and a lot of confusion with respect to what is the definition of a treaty, especially, peace and friendship treaties. What are they? You're coming here as a colonialist. You're going to live with us. We agree. Let's work together. Let's collaborate. Let's share the land. I think that's a common misinterpretation. A lot of people don't understand what the definition of a treaty is.
To put it in a way where it's quite clear, we were in the driver's seat at the time, and I would argue still today and debate heavily that we are still in the driver's seat in this day and age. And by that I mean, peace and friendship treaties are defined exactly as such. Well, we want peace and we want to make treaty. We want to be friends because, quite frankly, we were, when I say in the driver's seat, I'm being very diplomatic. We were in total control of our destiny, and we were in a position to negotiate, and hence the treaties came forward. And those treaties haven't changed. Quite often, Chief Terry and I talk about one particular treaty, but keeping in mind that it's a covenant. Treaties, It's a covenant chain of treaties where you can't have a conversation in isolation with one or two. It has to be all of them. And I believe that it's been understood that way and negotiated that way. I really feel firmly about that with our ancestors, being in that controlled position. And it's something we have to hold firm on today.
And it's really sad because the only way we sometimes, instead of negotiating and sitting at the table and understanding that, is you get that change in governments and that change in mentality. You'll have a liberal government, a conservative government looking at it from a different perspective. One government will move forward, another government will say, put the brakes on and say, well, no, we're going to litigate this. And so the only way we really win is by going to litigation, which, is in our favor in many times. I mean, we have many cases that have shown that.
Just in the context of Bill 5 as an example, the Supreme Court has recognized the fact that you can't make a decision and consult after the fact. It's the other way around. You got to consult before you make the decision. But we've sort of detracted a little bit from treaties, and Chris, and I think it's very important to get on track with that because I think that's a misunderstanding out there. What are the definitions of treaties?
And again, whose definition are we going to abide by? From our culture, as far as I understand it, our first treaties are in our creation stories, are with the animals. Our treaties are focused on responsibilities, as far as I understand it. And again, the best I can do is read stories and talk to people who know our language. It's in the language. And those of you who can speak and understand the language, that's some of the more we revitalize and the more we reconnect with our culture and with our practices and ways of living, our philosophies, and allow that to guide our path forward, I think we'll gain clearer understanding of what our ancestors in 1725 were thinking. But I see that already with a lot of our community members, the people that I'm very familiar with, the ones who hunt, live by the seasons. They hunt and fish. They're living treaty. They are living the treaty. It's the laws and the MOUs and everything else that impacts what they've been keeping going since time immemorial. So that's something to think about too, is that our treaty is in action, it's in responsibility, in relationship. And I wanted to mention something else as we talked about treaties and governance. When you look at the history, especially between Acadians and our peoples, you have to include that dynamic that there are those of us working class or whoever, family people on the ground, and then there's always that government people that make the decisions, even in 1602, 1675, 70. So when you start looking at some of the Acadian narratives and stuff, they have some of the problem with some of the colonial mentalities. They had been living here, developing relationships with Mi'kmaq and other people, but they always had to deal with some of those upper level thinking from London, from France. And so they get caught up in that. So the peace and friendship that the people on the ground live and endure kind of gets upset by some of these bills, whether it's a Bill C-5 policy or the Treaty of Utrecht of 1713, or it's always that dynamic of those of us on the ground. And that's where the treaty for me is also about relationships and relationship building with ourselves. And
the other thing that's interesting too that people sometimes confuse is they say treaties are with the crown.
Good point.
Elaborate a little bit on that one.
Yeah, sure thing. What is the crown? Who is the crown? What was the crown? As far as I understand it, and a lot of my information is drawn from historical experts and people that study this stuff for a living. And when you look at the crown, especially in the 1725 treaty, I get the picture from that Mi'kmaq people were seeking a third party conflict resolution model, to use a modern term. And the Crown was meant to, your people, the colonial people, those people in Massachusetts and that, they're going beyond the terms of peace and friendship, or they're causing harm. In some cases, you had people coastal raids, and this would be like privateers. So I really get the feeling that our ancestors were entering treaty with the Crown to say, you take care of your people, we're going to take care of our people, the Tura Wampum kind of thing. So the Crown, that concept of the Crown being the actual Crown in England, changed with Confederation. It's like Canada stole the crown and they became the crown. They became that judge. So even when we talk about Supreme Court council decisions, Supreme Court decisions and stuff, and taking it to court and litigation, some people will critique and say, well, whose court is it really? And whose perspectives? Because they base their histories, if you read those reports, on historical interpretations of Europeans at the time. So we're stuck in this who speaks for us.
In this day and age of, and you mentioned it, Chief Chris, responsibility, one of the main tenets of treaty is exactly, we're living it today. By that I mean, whose responsibility is it to hold the proponents accountable? These proponents are for profit. Different various levels of government quite often are in agreement or a contract basis with proponents for profit. And we ask ourselves, like, who is going to represent us? And I think the role in the organization of MTI is exactly that, to make sure our rights are not only protected, but asserted, and done in a responsible manner. And there's no greater, responsibility than this organization that we have collectively with our staff and the chiefs on board. So,
yeah, it's a challenge for sure in some cases, dealing with the whole issue of municipalities and the province and other levels of government. It seems that there's different layers and interpretation of what commitment is there. For example, here in New Brunswick, prior to the current Liberal government, there was a misunderstanding about, the duty to consult. How do you proceed along those lines? Well, the Supreme Court has clearly defined what the duty to consult is. So why stretch it and then come back and force us to go to court and, on an issue that's saying, well, it's not consultation. But I think now, we're seeing, things moving smoothly with respect to the understanding from the new government. And, we're not myopic. We want to see the province flourish. We want to see Canada flourish. But on the other hand, as we go down that journey towards reconciliation, we have to understand the past. We then have to, what I call indigenization, which means you understand where we're coming from culturally, et cetera. And then you can go down the path towards reconciliation. So it's a three-pronged kind of approach from my point of view.
But what Chris said about the language, I always say that to our Acadian brothers and sisters. I say, when you lose your culture and you lose your language, you lose your identity.
True enough.
Of who you are as a people. And I think that's what's happened to us as First Nation. We lost our language. We lost our culture through the reserve system. That was never our system. And then we've sort of, now we're gaining some of that back. Like you said, Chris, we have people who are practicing in our communities that are going back to cultural way of how we were as Aboriginal people. So I think that's important.
I've always been taught to, we actually, they say we lost things, but it was taken from us, and now we're taking it back. Language was taken from us, our culture, our practice, way of life. Now we're taking it back, and we are reasserting this. And we've been doing it for quite some time now, and the idea that we're celebrating 20th anniversary of our powwows, or 15 or 40, it's amazing.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
So I guess, guys, the next thing we'd like to talk about a little bit, I guess, is some of the challenges we're facing in our communities. I always like talking about that stuff because it's something we all have in common. We get around it with MTI and with Dean as a former chief, and I know, Chris, you probably have a lot of these things you're facing in your community now. So I know from our perspective, some of the challenges we're facing, mental, and it's not only us. Mental wellness is a big thing, and we're facing a lot of that in our community, and a lot of it is associated, unfortunately, with the drug situation.
It is a problem, that's for sure. And the sad part is we're seeing so many of our potential capacity out there. Like in our community, we can think of, a number of people that are saying, gosh, if they only got off the drugs, boy, can they ever move forward in business, etc. A lot of it.
Yeah.
I think failure to plan is planning to fail, as the saying goes, and introducing a comprehensive community plan like I did back when I was chief, and to see it continue and maintain. A lot of that success comes, but if there's no social net along with that success, then you face these ills of society as we're talking about, and it presents itself to be very challenging. But it's something we have to continue to fight because, as you said, it's mental awareness, it's intergenerational trauma. I mean, right off the bat, we're not dealt, a full hand, so to speak, nothing fair, and we have to make do with what we have, and that proves our, resiliency. But I mean, it's an ongoing battle. Jim,
Yeah, and then a lot of people. Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned intergenerational trauma and tracing that back to those colonial eras. We have to keep it, well, I have to keep in mind every day. When we sign those treaties, the colonial agenda, for lack of a better term, was their Canadian society, colonial society, settler society, however you choose to name it, thrived. Their story is a story of progress. From that moment on, ours is a story of,
decline,
strategic destruction.
it's intergenerational
genocide.
trauma, and theirs is intergenerational wealth.
Right. And so where does that brings us to today, and how do we move forward? So it's not that we can just move forward right away. We have to take account for the structural poverty that colonialism introduced and maintains. I hear a lot of talk about systemic racism, and one of the conversations I have is racism, drug addiction. Those are symptoms of a colonial situation. What we're facing is systemic colonialism. Our community our peoples are continuously reborn and rebirthed into a colonial relationship, a forced relationship with our treaty partner, in the sense that we need to stand up on our own. And when I hear the Premier of the province during this negotiations around tariffs with the New England states, and they talk about 1.5 billion softwood lumber is traded to the United States, what I hear is $1.5 billion that should be shared with our peoples. From day one, just think of first of all, what kind of policies would our ancestors have evolved over time to maintain the health and integrity of the land and the animals, but then think about what we could do as Mi'kmaq people with the Wolastoqey, 1.5, say evenly half of that. What would our schools look like? What would our homes look like? Would we choose to stay where we're at, or would we grow? So before we can think about moving forward, for me, I have to consider, and I've always been thinking about those structural poverty that intergenerational created, maintains, and regenerates.
And I think there's another flip side to that, which is that entitlement mentality that grows, right? Because you'll hear within your communities, it's my right, but it's you've got to understand that there's a responsibility that comes with that right. If I always put it in an analogy that people understand and say, we're 22,000 First Nation people in New Brunswick. If everybody had said it's my right to go out and cut trees, can you imagine how quick our forest would disappear, right? So how do you maintain that balance is a challenge as well, because we have a responsibility also, to make sure that for the next 7 generations, the resources are there, right? And that's a challenge, I think, that I have a hard time with often.
You're absolutely correct, bro. I always tell younger people, I say, yes, we have inherent rights, but if there's no trees, if there's no fish, where are our inherent rights? So that means that we have, getting back to your comment, that we have an obligation, and we do. True. I mean, people look at it and say, well, the Aboriginal people can go here and go there and fish and hunt and that, but we do it in a way that is sustainable. It's something that really is frustrating sometimes when you hear the comments from people. And yeah, just like anybody else, we do have people that abuse it, that don't understand it, but not in great numbers, no.
I think the 7th generation mindset, from a human's perspective, we're talking, a couple hundred years at most? But if you're looking at just a cedar tree, for instance, the life cycle of a cedar tree is 1,000 years. And if you're looking 7 generations ahead, that's 7,000 years from an environmental perspective. So that really changes the mindset. It changes my mindset. Quite often when I hear this, I think, well, what about the tree, cedar tree, Gaskuzi, in our language is a cedar tree, and that's something that is like 7,000 years.
Yeah.
You know, now if we have that kind of mindset, then I think we can be, we'll all do a better job planning
But
accordingly.
you go back historically again. I mean, going back to our language, a word like Ndugalamin, that's sustainability. I mean, that just didn't happen like this. It's something that was practiced, and I think that sometimes people aren't aware of the fact that there is sustainability out there, and we all have an obligation to follow through with it.
You almost have to wonder, because ownership, like this thing about ownership and wealth, that was foreign to our ancestors. That was introduced under the colonial system. Well, the more you have, the better you are. It gives you prestige. It gives you title and all that. Whereas we were more of a sharing culture. Everybody benefited, and you almost have to wonder where society would be if they would have adopted our culture instead of the colonial system.
Well, the definition of land ownership, even.
Yeah.
Aboriginal people never looked at the concept of saying that we own the land. We share the land.
Yeah.
In our case, we had 7 districts. So, each district would have a protocol to say, you can come into our territory and, share the land or whatever based on sustainability and so on. It goes on. But it's a different concept, I think, to where we've migrated to now. And that's why I say it's important to understand indigenization.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I turn to the research again. Being a nerd, I love history. I go back to that. So, sure, our people had a concept of co-ownership of land and sharing that. But there's stories prior to contact that were told to the first Europeans where our people fought for our homelands with other indigenous people.
Absolutely.
So although the concept of private, simple fee tenureship was not within our...
It was territorial.
But it was like, that's our homelands,
Yeah.
It's not a commodity, that's our survival. And when you talk indigenization, it keeps... And Netagululim, again, our language, the concept of two-eyed seeing. How many of us have the Mi'kmaq eye? I love that concept of two-eyed seeing, but our schools, our educational policies, is everything geared towards raising the next generation of elders? Or is it to create the next entrepreneurs or business? So what's going to happen to that Mi'kmaq eye? So the idea of moving forward, indigenization, industry, business, and decolonization, it's not a linear thing to me. It's very rhizomatic, like a root systems. It's all interconnected under the ground. Individually, we're all beautiful little flowers, but underneath, we're all interconnected by fundamental sources of life. And that's basically what our ancestors were passing on.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I was just thinking about along the lines of, where do we go when we're dealing with, companies and proponents and, neighbors for that matter.
Well, the reality is, in this day and age, how are First Nations funded? We all know it's no secret. The federal government has
Contribution
agreements that they fund First Nations. Ideally, as you stated, Chris, we would want to have our own wealth, so we can fund ourselves.
But at the same time, we're not to renege that responsibility that they do have. I think the definition of this paternalistic attitude and the fiduciary responsibility is, they themselves need the education. And it boils down to all of this. It boils down to educating our youth. We assume two-eyed seeing, you have the Mi'kmaq eye you speak of, Chief Chris. That's a big assumption. It's a big assumption that we have our youth growing up with that Mi'kmaq eye. I'm proud to say in our community and many other communities, there's culture, there's powwow, there's our own education systems there that are starting to, my daughter went to a survival school for the first one whole year of her formal schooling, and that's amazing, and so it's changing. And I think I've said this on the last segment, it's Turtle Island, and our ancestors and my elders always say change is, supposed to take its time and be slow. I just hope it doesn't take another 500 years.
Yeah, very true. That's the scary part, right? Is how long is it going to take, and are we going to be able to do it? I still think there's, the reality of the world we live in right now is this world where we have to create our own wealth, and how do we do that? And I think we've been fortunate with this particular government now. We've got we're negotiating the tax agreement. hopefully that's coming to fruition, and then we move forward from there, and we go on to the next step. And the next step is working with proponents, and a lot of them that we're doing with Overbar, us, and MTI at the Port of Beldoon is there's great opportunity. You need that beacon of light in a region to give hope and prosperity, because right now, so many mills have closed down, so many mines have closed down, so many companies are gone. There's not a lot really in our region, and we can't be reliant on people on fixed income. I say, like people who are retiring or whatever, because they're on they're not going to contribute to your companies, your businesses that you have as much, because their freeable income isn't there. So how do we grow that economy again is going to be a challenge in the north.
I think one thing you've developed your local, like with the two communities and the region with the Economic Development Corporation, where you have Ukpi-Gunjik and Wenpegajaway, leading that and really bringing along the partners, Bathurst and the surrounding area, Dalhousie, Charlotte, and everyone in between. I think that is going to change the systemic mindset of having that defeatist mentality up here, like that you're speaking of, and it's really changing, and it's flipping it on its head to say, well, you're not going to forget us up here in the northern part of the province any longer. We're here to stay, and we're going to have our presence felt.
We'll be right back.
So guys, I guess, we were talking a little bit about proponents coming in and engagement. Do you find you're overwhelmed sometimes with the amount of people we got coming in?
I have to say yes, absolutely. Quite often, my staff and I are fielding, on a daily basis, the bombardment of proponents coming in, wanting to get in front of our 9 chiefs and, selling their snake oil or coming across with some very sound, sustainable ideas and business projects. And so it's a matter of, I call it a delicate dance. We dance each and every day. And, with Karen Augustine leading our economy building and, our operations team that really vet each and every briefing note, each and every opportunity before we bring them to leadership. And then, we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to present the best case scenario for each of your respective communities, because it would be wrong of MTI to say, well, this is good for you or that's good for you. What we are there to make sure 2 things: 1, opportunity is there for leadership, and 2, we have a level table, just like this table here in front of us.
Yeah, and I always tell proponents, you need at least a couple of 100 cups of tea to develop a relationship. Sit down, chat, understand. There's a lot of organizations out there saying, like, if you want to deal with Aboriginal people, here's what you want to do. Well, if you want to do something, you come in and learn from the community itself. Sit down with the community, talk with the community. I think most proponents understand it. They want to, see progress. This is the concern I've got with, Bill C5. The government's pushing it, but companies are saying, wait a sec, if First Nations aren't on side, we're not going to do it.
Well, Jim, here's that would be the ideal approach. Here are some, here's an example of a bit of a concerning approach where you have proponents saying now, okay, the federal government is leading this. If we just, communicate with one organization or the other, we got them all covered. And we're facing that right now, not to get into specifics, but we're facing that today, and we have a meeting on Tuesday to address it, to stop, slow your roll, and communicate with leadership so they can make an informed decision on how this is going to move forward. Because right now, there are other groups, and I think that's where we have the masses on our sides. We have environmental groups on our side now to say, hey, no one's against development, but you're going to do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at the responsibilities with respect to stewards for Mother Earth, and you look at the transparency with respect to. I want to get back on the C5 again. Not willing to bring in free, prior, and informed consent under UNDRIP makes it suspicious, right? Saying these projects, C5 was designed to move forward at a great momentum. These projects. Just push them right through in the interest of the country. But you have to realize the Supreme Court at some point or another, in a number of cases, said it doesn't matter what the priorities of the country are. There's still a requirement there for, consultation and dealing with Indigenous communities.
That bill is the biggest threat to Indigenous rights since Harper's omnibus bill,
Yeah.
which was Bill C-51. You know, so it's worse than that, and that's saying a lot.
But I think, you know, in that, I always say the devil's in the details, right?
For sure.
So until we start getting into the projects and seeing what ones are being pushed forward, then we'll really see. I mean, I give, you know, the Prime Minister credit. He spent the whole day. I mean, that's a whole day of his time with First Nation leadership. I can't recall a Prime Minister sitting at a table with that many chiefs. We had the opportunity for 633 chiefs right across Canada to sit there and listen for the whole day. That's, you know, in a sense, that's a good step, I think, in working that way, right?
It's a good step, and I think a bigger step would be if he sat with the Mi'kmaq leadership for a whole day at the very least. It would be wonderful, but you're meeting with him soon, I hear, so maybe you can make that happen between you and Jim.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to have, I'm new, I'm only 5 weeks. A majority of the council I worked with as when I was a council on them. So when there are a lot of proponents that come. I'm very grateful to have colleagues, councilors. They're really great at being the first connect and building those relationships and making sure the rest of councilors are aware of that and up to date on that. So I'm really grateful for that. You know, I like that idea about being self-determining. I use cliches for my own self. We've got to be determined to do it ourselves. But I'm also thinking about sustainability, sustainable self-determination. That's what we're talking about, and that's what I'm asking. My opinion on resource development, oil and gas, has changed a lot in the last 15 years by opening my mind to the other side of the argument and listening to those voices I normally wouldn't listen. So that's about conversation. That's about dialogue. What I'm concerned about that you already spoke about is that these kind of bills and these acts break down a lot of the conversation progress that we've made and how do we move forward. We need to move forward in these kind of ways, but you know, I don't want to do it under threat, and then I don't want to have to fight back using violence. We want to use peace, friendship, and the love of family.
Yeah, and negotiation, right? That's the key, I think, is the more we talk, the better it is. I mean, that's what it's going to get. I mean, I always say you'll get more accomplished at a negotiating table than you will in litigation in court.
Absolutely.
And that's the reality.
Yeah, and
100%
partnership, you know, the theme that you're talking about, partnership, you know, working collaboratively. And I think that's the key to success as we move forward. I mean, everybody wants the same thing. I mean, we want to see development. We want to see prosperity for future generations. Our future generations, your future generation. But on the other hand, at one point, it was for your generations and nothing to do with us. We were wards of the state. Well, that paradigm has shifted now. We want to move forward in partnership in a way where we can all share with the benefits that are out there. And we're not myopic, you know. I mean, we've been working with, you know, the city of Bathurst. We got the mayor of Bell Bay coming on in a later episode. You know, and it's all for the same reasons, working collaboratively. And you know, you go back to the free and prior and informed consent. It's no different than we practice that now. We have 4 pillars. If you're coming into our community, you have to have balance between those 4 pillars: social, economic, cultural, and environment. If they're, you know, it's not about chasing money. And everybody else out there wants the same thing. They want their future generations to benefit from what we have now, to be able to see what we have now, to be able to rebuild as well. You look at the salmon population. It's at the stage now where we have to rebuild it, but then let's move and rebuild it, you know. And in other areas, let's, you know, conserve what we have.
I wanted to speak to that idea that we're moving away from the wards of the state. I think there's some, again, devil in the details. I think for all of us here, we've moved away. For a lot of our people in our mind have moved away from that. But some of these policies and some of that legislation that gets thrown our way is trying to put us back into that ward of state
100%.
and just being aware of that. Something that I thought of often, and I had a lot of great conversations with my non-native colleagues at university during the TRC. I kept saying, you know, when we looked at the TRC and the purpose of that was looking at what was the impact of colonization on our peoples, residential schools, assimilation, the whole thing. I feel for Canadians, there has to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of sort for how the average Canadian has been impacted by industry and colonial decisions around the land and the devastation of the land that impact our hunting and fishing. What has that done for the quality of life for our neighbors and our allies and that kind of stuff? Because I think that's also something to be said when we look at some of the non-native protests against government. They're saying, look, we're working class people, and now as the country's moving away from some of these resources, moving towards AI and other technological ways, those workers, they're no longer needed, so they're getting left behind. They're getting treated like baggage that's left behind. So at the end of the day, we're all people. I feel as Mi'kmaq people, we're family focused. Our nationhood is family focused, but we're working with governments that are mostly industry focused or at least profit based, that kind of mentality. So we're at odds there. We're family focused, moving ahead. I'd like to see us moving as a district model, sharing and working and collaborating, not just in New Brunswick, but all of us around Maui, Bokta Bay. Those kind of long-term visions, and how do we get there today with our choices?
Well, there's a lot to learn, from the past, and some of the trains of thought that go along with some of the, the knowledge keepers of the past. I mean, you look at, some of the, like the Eighth Fire, for example, or the Eagle and Condor. It talks about a time where we must come together. If we don't come together, humanity's in jeopardy. And those are things that were passed down.
Prophecies,
Yeah. And I mean, we've got to be able to focus on, moving forward, but moving forward in a way that, I think it's sustainable. And I'm optimistic, quite frankly. I think we have to move, though, and not usurp our rights. And, that's where people like Dean come in and make sure that, the rights are protected and we're moving forward in a way that
you get into a good
positive.
point. You get into a good point there, bro, because capacity is what we're lacking often, right? If you get, as we stated, Dean's just the organization. Imagine from a community level when you've got 30 proponents coming at you with different ideas and different, expectations, and you're trying to manage that because you're saying, okay, well, what is what? And as you referred to snake oil salesman, Dean, there's a lot of those out there that the technology is not proven, but they're looking at that First Nation
Check off.
or avenue to get in for funding, or so how do you analyze that if you haven't got the capacity? And that's a challenge for a lot of so when I look at across Canada and 633 First Nations, some are more advanced than others, because they've been able to make themselves in a situation where they have either financial freedom where they can get that, go out and get that capacity, or they have it within their community because they're a bigger community and they have more people that have gone out and, furthered themselves in education or whatever.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the title of this Mawio'mi. If we think about what Mawio'mi was for our people as a governance structure and how our people met and came across, I think those are things that I'm really looking forward to within my own community. Once we get into a good flow here, I hope to reach out to former councillors and chiefs and try to bring together a little think tank, because a lot of these ideas people have had together. We could meet together. If we had a Mawio'mi, Mount Carlton, bring in all our chiefs, but our community members, our community leaders, and having conversations like this. Imagine if we had our powwows at the same time we had like a governance talk where we could just talk like this. Another thing I think in changing the mindset, I don't want to forget and not get this out. Ways I kind of move forward in my own head. It's not crown lands. It's not the honor of the crown. It's treaty lands, and it's the honor of treaties. And that kind of mindset, those little everyday mindful activities we can do to correct our mindset on how we approach our job, brings us right in touch with our responsibilities.
You brought up a good point about Mawio'mi. What we try to do is what I call intellectual capital. Everybody else, in their communities have people out there of influence. They may not be in your community, they may be in Ottawa, they may be in Toronto, Vancouver, wherever. But you can tap into them for ideas, you tap into them for networking, mentoring. I mean, there's a whole whack of stuff that you can do if you lack the capacity, I think that we've tried to do that in our community, and it opens doors. One thing leads to another, and so you try and capitalize as much as you can.
Right.
We've learned from a military point of view, you do what you can with what you got, right? You may not have all the resources you got.
That's from a Mi'kmaq standpoint as well.
Yeah, well, you lived it.
We all lived it.
But Chris stated it earlier. It's working together. If you're there, that's the approach we've always taken. Is saying together we're stronger. And if we can move together on a project, we're both going to, everybody, even if it's 2 communities, 5 communities, 9 communities, moving together on a particular project, you're going to make it more successful, and you mitigate the risk that goes with that project, but you also create more capacity, which is really important.
That's Mawio'mi is working together. Every chief before the 2 of you and when I was, it's all built upon the backs of that, right back to our ancestors. And the idea of understanding the lateral violence and all the generational trauma that comes with all of that. Quite often it delays our development in some respects. So to hear what you have to say right now, Chief Chris, is refreshing. It was a mindset I had as well, and something you have been doing it, in practice since you've got elected. And it's just it's like you said, Jim, it's positive things ahead, and it's really good to hear.
We'll be right back.
Well, welcome back to our final segment here of Mawio'mi Gathering Place. We always have some heated discussion here in between breaks. Off camera, so it's really great because it's a chance to interact even some more.
It's the good stuff for
It's the good stuff. But one of the things we talked about a little bit was the education aspect. And Chris, it's really important. It's like you said, and I just wanted you to go on that little narrative that you were going on. It was something that made sense to me.
Sure. So I was talking about, the blueprint moving forwards is in our song, Get Me Day Demenage, our honor song, our creation story. Our resurgence is there. It's in our language and moving forward. And just the conversation you were talking about building relationships. Just in the last 30, 40 minutes, we've had conversations, and we've had conversations we haven't been able to have even though we've met in other places. And just think about what this could be if we expand it in so many other dynamic ways. What particularly were you?
I was looking at the education thing and how we were talking about in school that sometimes the narrative about Canada is not always, they leave out that narrative about the residential school system, the reserve, creation of reserves and all that, because it's not. A lot of people just think that Aboriginal people, you're living on a reserve that was given to you. Well, that was not us who made those decisions.
Yeah, we have to understand our history and understand how I refer to that concept of structural poverty. Like, what did colonialism really take away from our people? Sure, we talk about land, we talk about rights and things like that, but ultimately it was the family structure. It was attacking the sources that provided holistic growth and development for the family. When you look at treaty negotiations 1725, they stopped treaties, negotiations. Why? There were representatives from our area in Boston and those places. They stopped, and the Europeans would say they would have to make a major decision. Why were they coming back here? I assume it's because they had to talk to the clan mothers and the other people. They also stopped treaty negotiations for hunting and fishing season. What does that tell us about our ancestors and their intention? The family was a core element, and that is something that residential schools took away. And then it seems as if the messaging is, okay, so that's in the past, let's get over it and move forward. You don't understand the intergenerational trauma and how that stuff builds up and builds up. So there's a lot of internal work we need to do within ourselves personally, families, and I kind of put I bet heavily on the idea of the more we build up and empower family growth, that's going to move towards broader community growth and nation building. We're still working New Brunswick, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, those like we never knew boundaries. Borders that was created by the colonial system, right? Okay, this is New Brunswick, this is Nova Scotia, for us it was all just one territory. They go Quebec. I mean, when you look at the Mi'kmaq people, I mean, we were in a pretty large area of coverage.
I spent 2 years with the Helsik in northern BC, and that comment about family, during the herring row, for example, everybody's focused on that. During the salmon season, they go down to the fish plant and we're all, filleting the fish. And it's similar with the Northern Cree in Quebec, and some parts of Northern Ontario, where the kids go out of school, take them out of school, and they go on the goose hunt, right? And one of the things I did want to make sure we cover is the duty to consult. That's as we're looking at our environment around us, and what I mean by environment, levels of government, companies that come in, there is a necessity before you move forward on projects in our traditional territory to consult, Dean, right?
Yeah, well, 100%. I think where the line gets blurred and misunderstood is that there are organizations that represent our communities where it's for-profit economic development. But at the same time, you have an organization, a rights-based organization such as MTI, where we're there to kind of not impede development, but to make sure it's done the proper way. And quite often the proponent will reach out to an economic development or tribal council of that nature to say, well, let's just move ahead with it, we're ready to go. And that's where we come in. And so we're trying to rectify that to make it so that, I equate it to the Trans-Canada Highway. You got two lanes going in the same direction. Once in a while you're gonna pass and move ahead, but at the same time you respect those two lanes. I don't want to dare compare it to our wampum process because that's a whole other conversation that we could have. But in terms of economic development and where the duty to consult, where does it lie? Who does it lie with? I can assure you this, and I can say this with 100% confidence, it lies between the two men beside me, and women, whoever has to be that a leader and the council of that respective community. That's where the duty to consult lies.
Yeah, and what is consultation?
And MTI is there to make sure that consultations happen with a capital C, not a small C.
Yeah.
Because
discussion.
If that's
not,
the case.
it's not discussion. It's
not-
sitting down and looking at, what is it that concerns us?
100%.
What is it? What are the ramifications, and how are you going to address those ramifications?
And the concept of consultation, I have that definition of how I think that should operate, but it's also important to me as I move forward that I hear from my community members.
100%.
They're the frontline people. They're the ones hunting and fishing and going beyond those borders and breaking those rules, and they're the ones that are getting assaulted and arrested and charged. It's our people that have the idea of how they should be consulted. It is a tricky road when we're chief and council, and then we're part of a corporation and all of that, but then it gets mixed up, or not mixed up, but it's part and parcel with our cultural identity. But they're two separate identities. Our Mi'kmaq concept of governance and rights is much different than what our duties and responsibilities as chief and council is. So it's really important to me that the community members, the inherent right holders, the member, that I hear from them and what do they want from consultation? Do they understand what duty to consult to mean? Do the DFO, the people on the front line, what's their relationship to consult? What is their relationship with our people? And unfortunately, it's been hostile to our detriment.
Even looking at why do we have chief and council? That was imposed, and some of the communities decided to go along with it just to move forward. I can't remember the exact date on that. Chris, you'd probably know more about it than I do.
Consult my notes.
Okay, but from what I read, it was imposed. There was a lot of people,
Yes.
a lot of chiefs were dead set against it because it was foreign to them. They had a system that was altogether different.
Yeah, what it is now, I think, is that, however that's defined in each of the 9 respective communities I'll only speak of, is one thing, but the idea of, engagement, if a proponent comes into town and engages with the community once, twice, a month before the project is to go ahead, that's not consultation. It may be a small type of engagement, but is that enough? Is that sufficient? And the obvious answer is no. So
And
that's
if we're
a
talking
challenge.
about building peaceful, friendly relationships, that should be built into the whole consultation process. Like you said, it takes 1,000 cups of tea.
Something Chief
In
says all
those
the
cups
time,
of tea, sometimes those conversations are, how's the weather kind of thing, and maybe it's not
Exactly.
so important.
Exactly.
Or a simple call, you hit it right on the button. You're exactly right. Chris, is when you're looking at this, is it's developing a relationship. That's the success story, the relationship.
Yeah.
One where a relationship built in trust. I always tell proponents, don't ever lose that trust because once you lose that trust, it's going to be hard to get back. But built on that trust and honesty and understanding and transparency, if you're doing that, your project will be successful.
Yeah, and you know, Dean, a little shot across the bow here. I find that sometimes proponents come in, they're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
Who do I deal with? You know, well, you got to deal with us. No, you got to deal with us. I always say you deal with the community.
Yep.
Now, if it gets technical, Dean's organizations has the technical people to help us with, you know, the rights-based stuff and the research in particular,
Yes.
to move forward in an Aboriginal Indigenous way.
Yeah.
And I think those are sometimes a frustrating thing for me.
But I think from a proponent's perspective sometimes, and from other communities, it's like it goes back to that capacity issue, right? Because you may not have that capacity in your community to do that, so then you have to rely and lean on it. And it's the reality. I mean, you know, it's easy to say that, but not everybody has a person with a master's degree sitting in his office next to him.
How are you going to learn? How are you going to learn
But it's still a
if you have
challenge.
somebody spoon-feeding you all the time?
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to get out there and make mistakes and learn the hard way.
I think what I've, you know, in developing and fostering our relationship, Jim, is to make things clear to say that whenever you reach out, if you need to reach out, we're there. If you don't need us, just know that we're there anyway.
I want parting comments here. Dean, we talked about treaties. We talked about duty to consult. We brushed ahead on reconciliation. UNDRIP, any parting comments?
Yeah, I think a final comment would be to, you know, revert to our youth, install education with a capital E, and educate everyone. I'm not just talking about our youth, because if we don't do that, then we will continuously find ourselves in this situation. It'll just be different names and faces.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well, you know, first of all, very grateful to be a part of the
thanks for being
conversation and that, and looking forward to working forward with you.
We're looking forward to having you
Yes.
on again.
And I'll just
Both of you.
reiterate the concepts of family, and it's in our stories. Read our creation story. If you want to understand Mi'kmaq culture, explore our creation story. There's multiple ways of learning it online, digital media, video. There's all kinds of stuff. Understand those stories, and especially for us, our responsibilities are in that creation story and our songs.
Well, bro, it's been a great session.
Great.
I mean,
Thank you guys for coming. I mean, it's been great. We look forward to having you back, and we continue to plow forward.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you all for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to our next episode.